I signed that prenup with tears in my eyes, thinking I was protecting the man I loved from my so-called unstable background. His mother watched me sign it with a smug, victorious smile. But just 90 days later, one unexpected phone call wiped that smile clean off her face. Before I tell you how one document changed everything, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and stick with me. You're going to want to hear how I went from feeling worthless to realizing I was the one holding all the power. They say love makes you blind, but I learned it's not always love that blinds us. It's our desperate need to belong. My name is Alyssa, and this is the story of how I almost gave up my self-worth for a man named Ethan, and how I reclaimed it in the most unexpected way. It all started 2 years ago when I was 29, working as a music teacher at a public school in Oakland. The pay? Barely enough. But I loved my job. There's something magical about watching a kid nail their first piano scale or sing confidently in front of a crowd. That was the kind of richness I believed in until Ethan walked in. We met at a bookstore cafe on a rainy Thursday. I was grading student compositions when I heard this deep, genuine laugh. I looked up, and there he was, reading something on his phone and smiling like the world didn't weigh him down. "Sorry," he said, noticing me staring. "My friend just sent the dumbest joke ever." He had kind eyes and a suit tailored to perfection. "Ethan," he said, offering his hand. "Alyssa," I replied. And just like that, we talked for 2 hours straight. He was an investment consultant, but not arrogant or flashy. He asked about my students, listened, laughed. From that day on, we were inseparable. For the next 6 months, Ethan became a part of my everyday. He'd bring coffee to my classroom on Fridays, help me carry instruments for student recitals, and even sat through 3 hours of off-key middle school performances without complaint. He made me feel seen, valued, loved, but that feeling didn't last. The first time I met his family, I understood exactly where I stood in their perfect little hierarchy. Their estate looked like something out of a luxury magazine. Marble floors, gold-accented staircases, and a chandelier that probably cost more than my car. His mother, Margaret, was a former federal prosecutor with a glare that could freeze boiling water. His father, Thomas, was more reserved, but every bit as polished. Margaret greeted me with a handshake that felt more like a warning. "So you're the music teacher Ethan has been telling us about," she said, making music teacher sound like a pitiful hobby. "It must be so fulfilling to make a difference, even if the salary's not exactly glamorous. Or, I imagine your hours are quite flexible." Thomas was polite but silent, watching his wife for cues like a well-trained second-in-command. Ethan tried to defend me. Kind of. He'd change the subject or chuckle awkwardly, but never really stood up for me. I told myself it was just nerves or that he didn't want to start a fight. But deep down, I knew he was used to this world, where status was everything and someone like me didn't belong. Still, I kept trying. I baked cookies for family gatherings, remembered birthdays, bit my tongue every time Margaret took a shot at my upbringing. I told myself love would win, that eventually they'd see who I really was. And then Ethan proposed. He proposed on a quiet Sunday morning in the same cafe where we first met. A simple piano melody played in the background as he dropped to one knee and pulled out a ring that sparkled like 1,000 promises. I cried. I said yes. I believed, for a moment, that this was my fairy tale. But reality came knocking fast. That evening, when we shared the news with his parents, Margaret didn't even blink before saying, "Well, we'll need to discuss a prenuptial agreement. Not congratulations, not welcome to the family, just prenup." Ethan looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. "Mom, can we celebrate first?" he offered weakly. But we both knew he wouldn't push back. Not really. Later that night, Margaret called me directly. Her tone was icy sweet. "Alyssa, dear, I hope you understand. This isn't personal. Ethan's worked so hard to build his career. We simply have to be cautious. Cautious. That was her word for, you don't belong. The prenup was brutal. No matter how long we were married, I'd have no claim to his wealth. If we divorced, I'd get a modest stipend for only 24 months. If he died, I'd receive a small life insurance payout, but nothing from his estate. And worst of all, if I ever damaged the family's reputation, I'd walk away with nothing. Ethan sat there as the lawyer explained every clause. Sometimes he'd glance at me with an apologetic expression, but not once did he object. "It's just a formality, babe," he whispered. It doesn't mean anything, but it meant everything. It meant they saw me as a threat, a gold digger, a charity case in designer shoes. It meant they believed their wealth needed protection from me. Still, I signed it. I signed because I thought proving myself meant sacrificing my pride, because I loved him. Because a part of me believed maybe I did need to earn their trust. Margaret watched me sign with that smug smile, like she'd just won a game I never agreed to play. But 3 months later, that smile would vanish. 3 months after the prenup, my world shattered, and then transformed. It started with a phone call. My father, Leon, had collapsed at work, a heart attack. The kind doctors call massive. I spent 3 days in that hospital, barely sleeping, holding his hand, begging him to fight. Ethan stayed by my side, brought food, held me while I cried. And in those moments, I remembered the man I fell in love with, the man I believed in. On the third night, Dad squeezed my hand and whispered, "When this is over, go to the bank, safety deposit box. Everything you need is inside." He died 2 hours later. The funeral was quiet, just the way he'd want it. A few of his coworkers, our neighbors, some of my fellow teachers. No extravagant flowers, no long eulogies, just love. I thought grief was the hardest thing I'd ever face. I was wrong. The key belonged to a safety deposit box in a downtown bank, and what I found inside, it changed everything. The box was heavier than I expected. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were stacks of documents, photos, old newspaper clippings, and letters with my name on them. The first headline nearly knocked the air out of my lungs. Tech visionary sells startup for $2.9 billion. The photo below it, a much younger Leon, smiling and shaking hands with men in suits. Billionaires, industry giants, men I'd seen on business magazine covers. I flipped through more clippings, stock certificates, bank statements, investment portfolios, pictures of my dad at black tie galas, TED-style conferences, and charity banquets, and then a stack of handwritten letters, each one addressed to me. I read the first one slowly, tears forming as I took in his words. "I didn't tell you about the money because I didn't want you growing up defined by it. I wanted you to know your value came from within, not from your bank account. I wanted you strong, independent, grounded, but now you're ready to carry this legacy. Not just the money, but the mission." My father hadn't been working a boring desk job all those years. He was a tech genius, a quiet billionaire, and he'd been giving most of it away, funding scholarships, building schools, donating to educational causes anonymously, all while living in a modest apartment, so I'd grow up understanding worth without wealth. When I met with Mr. Grant the next day, he told me the full picture. After taxes and donations already set in motion, my inheritance totaled just over $2.1 billion. And my first thought? That damn prenup. I thought of Margaret's cold eyes, of Ethan sitting silently beside her as I signed that contract like I was begging for scraps. I thought of every backhanded compliment, every time I was made to feel like I didn't belong. And then I laughed. Not a chuckle, a full, uncontrollable laugh that echoed in the bank vault. Later that night, I sat Ethan down and told him everything about the inheritance, the tech company, the foundation my dad had built in secret. At first, he was stunned, then hurt. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "Because I needed to know who you were when you thought I had nothing," I said. His face fell. He started rewinding every memory in his head, his mother's remarks, his silence, the prenup. I didn't have to say a word. He knew what he'd allowed. A week later, we were back at his parents' house for dinner. I didn't mention the inheritance, not directly, just dropped casual hints. That I'd be taking a break from teaching to focus on family investments, that I had meetings with financial advisors, that I'd discovered some interesting assets my father left behind. Margaret barely paid attention. "Oh, how nice," she said, patting my hand like I was a child who'd found $20 in the laundry. "It's always good to have a little nest egg." I smiled, then reached into my purse and pulled out the bank statements. The room went silent. Margaret's wine glass froze mid-air. Thomas's eyes darted between the pages. Ethan looked like he'd forgotten how to breathe. "These numbers must be incorrect," Margaret said, voice trembling for the first time since I met her. "Oh, they're very correct," I said calmly. "My father was Leon Harper, founder of Harper Secure Technologies." Thomas's jaw dropped. "Wait, the Leon Harper? The one who developed enterprise-level encryption for?" "Yes," I interrupted gently. "That Leon Harper, the same man you once referred to as having a modest background." Margaret went pale. Suddenly, everything shifted. She started praising my strong values and my father's brilliant mind. Thomas tried to make small talk about investment strategies. Even Ethan's sister, who never once texted me before, suddenly wanted to grab brunch sometime. It was surreal. But I wasn't there for revenge. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was observing, watching. And the person I watched most closely was Ethan. He didn't celebrate. He didn't beam with pride. He looked ashamed. Ashamed that he hadn't stood up for me. Ashamed that he let his family humiliate me. Ashamed that the woman he thought he was rescuing now had a net worth that made him the one being protected. He kept asking, "Why didn't you tell me?" But we both knew why. I asked him one simple question. "Would your mother have respected me if she'd known?" He didn't respond, because we both knew the answer. For the next month, we tried to make the relationship work, but everything had changed. Ethan struggled with the shift in dynamic. He had loved the version of me who needed him, the version who fit neatly into the world he was born into, the version who was supposed to be grateful for his protection. Now that I no longer needed it, now that I was the one holding the power, he didn't know who we were anymore. The final straw came when he brought up the prenup. "We should tear it up," he said. "Start fresh, now that everything's different." I looked him in the eyes. "Different how?" He said, Because I'm wealthy now?" I finished for him. The silence between us said more than words ever could. I handed him the ring and kept the prenup. Not out of spite, but as a reminder. That document taught me more than any degree ever could. That prenup wasn't just a contract. It was a mirror. It showed me who really had my back and who only stood beside me when they thought I had nothing to offer. A year later, I launched the Leon Harper Foundation, named after my father, the man who taught me that self-worth doesn't come from dollars, degrees, or last names. It comes from how you treat people when you think no one's watching. I still teach, but now I teach at a school I built with my own money in a neighborhood that reminds me of where I came from. A place where kids grow up knowing their value, long before the world tries to define it for them. And as for love, it found me again when I wasn't looking. At a grocery store checkout of all places. He's a youth counselor, lives in a one-bedroom apartment, drives a beat-up Ford. But he sees me, not my bank account, not my foundation, me. He listens, he defends me, and he'd go to war for me if it came down to it. My father's real gift wasn't the money, it was the lesson. That real wealth is knowing your value before anyone else does. That love without respect is just decoration. And that no contract, no matter how expensive, should ever make you forget your worth. Margaret thought her prenup would protect her son. Instead, it protected me from a life where I was never going to be truly accepted. Sometimes the best thing someone can do is show you exactly who they are. Because then, you stop begging for acceptance and start demanding respect. That prenup, it was the most expensive education I never had to pay for. And it taught me one priceless truth. Never let anyone make you feel small because of where you come from. If this story touched you, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs this message. Drop a comment below. Have you ever been judged for where you came from? I read every single one. Until next time, remember, you are worth more than anyone's opinion of you.